just here in Germany, what we have seen is an increase in the Gini coefficient from 30.2 in 2011 to almost 31.7 today, higher than it was the year before the financial crisis. Our political leaders, global or otherwise, have come forward with a number of solutions that they promise will mend this gap. And many of these solutions, in particular those coming from the political left, have approached this issue with the traditional expansion of state power, proposing solutions like increased welfare benefits for the poor, or progressively higher taxes on the rich. And yet, many of these solutions have been criticized for disincentivizing the working class from participating in the labor force. And while this view might seem a bit condescending, ultimately there is a bit of logical sense to it, especially when one considers the way the welfare system works. Essentially, in the welfare system, there is always a cutout in terms of personal income. If you make above X amount of money, there can be no benefits for you. And for the abject poor of the West, you can begin to see where the dilemma comes in. For most are prevented from even common sense by improving their own personal income. And this isn't just hypothetical. The evidence for this is to be found all around. Consider studies done by both Stanford University and Harvard University into America's 1996 welfare laws. What these studies concluded was that the previous welfare program, when welfare was far more available to recipients within the United States, was that the welfare program depressed participation in the workforce, especially among female participants, and depressed the ability of its participants to climb out of poverty. Now, this has caused many on the political left and right to turn their backs on the traditional welfare state, with former conservative American President Ronald Reagan stating aptly that we should measure welfare success based off of how many people leave welfare. And even liberal-leaning President Bill Clinton making his case that welfare, quote, allows millions of fathers to leave their responsibilities while taxpayers pick up the tab. But yet, these leaders responded not with replacements of the welfare system, but with incremental reforms that have arguably made it worse. Consider the flagship program of former President Bill Clinton, TANF, or Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. This welfare program was initially intended to be self-sustaining. It would allow families to exit poverty upon receiving its benefits by lowering the time in which they were eligible for said benefits. However, the program has proven to largely be a failure. As of this year, 77% of poor American families still don't have access to its services, and many of those families who do still live below the poverty line. What can be done? Well, one solution, or rather, leap of faith, as some have suggested, is in a little-known concept called universal basic income. Now, before I begin the discussion, what is universal basic income? Well, the concept is quite simple. It's a no-strings-attached cash payout given on a regular basis to all the citizens of the country. It is given without testing for means, without testing for employment, without testing for drugs, and without worrying about how that money is used. Now, with everything I just said about employment and such, that solution might seem a bit counterintuitive. However, it actually makes a great deal of logical sense. Consider this. If everyone receives the same basis for their personal income, there is no disincentive to work. Indeed, it also lowers the barrier for entrepreneurialism in the first place, affording the poor the capital they need to own and manage their own business. It also grants them more personal freedom, especially from the requirements on spending imposed upon either traditional or reformed welfare systems. And it neutralizes the complaints of the upper and middle class who might otherwise be opposed to such assistance by providing them with the solace that their money is not being used on what they might view as productivity-killing welfare programs. Now, all of this might seem too good, too utopian to be true, and indeed, that's why we included the question mark, it may be. But there are many cases where universal basic income has been applied, and not just applied, but applied successfully. And for at least two of these places, there's a bit of personal image. The first is the American state of Alaska, where universal basic income in the form of the Alaska Permanent Fund has been a guarantee in the state constitution since 1976. Since then, every Alaska resident has received an annual variable check between $1,000 to $2,000 United States dollars. While I can sadly say that my family had never lived in Alaska long enough to receive said benefits, ultimately, and really, the program is quite ambitious. What ultimately is very interesting about this program is not what it does to the Alaskan economy, but what it doesn't do. What it doesn't do, as some critics have charged of UBI, is decrease the Alaskan employment rate in any meaningful manner. Indeed, since 1976, and as a direct result of the Alaska Permanent Fund, Alaska's part-time employment rate has actually seen a slight boost. Now, that brings up the first example. The second I would like to discuss is that of Stockton, California. And for those of you who have never been to Stockton, here are just a few images of the neighborhood that my grandmother lives in. 1 in 4 people here live in poverty. This in a country where the poverty rate is less than half of that. But these unique conditions, these uniquely bad conditions, were what made Stockton the ideal staging ground for one of the most ambitious American UBI projects to date. Starting this year, every 100 Stockton residents will be eligible for a $500 monthly check for a duration of 18 months. This extraordinarily generous program, one that many may charge is simply impossible to run, even at this small scale, being in a country where the average person can't even come up with $400 in the case of an emergency. But if you're not convinced yet, this trend is spreading, and it's not just in places like Stockton or Alaska. It also ranges from places like neighboring Oakland, California, to Ontario, Canada, to Kenya, and even places as far afield as Cambodia. And what these programs have shown is a string of positive benefits for their recipients. Take the program in Canada, for example, which has shown at least 4 major identifiable benefits for its recipients. These, of course, being an increase in youth education, a decrease in infant mortality, a general decrease in psychiatric emergencies, and an increase in home ownership rates. Experiments done in Kenya have also shown a 23% decrease in the headcount index of their participants, a measure of poverty. And finally, and most importantly in my view, experiments done in the 1970s and 1980s with a similar guaranteed income program have shown that UBI programs actually increase the workforce orientation of their participants, especially among females. Now, for the most important thing to take away from all this, what I believe is that these programs, at least these trials, have led to an increase in their participants' personal income, an increase in their quality of life, and ultimately an increase in their stature and autonomy in society. All the while, the importance of the traditional welfare programs has declined. But before I come to any conclusion, I would also like to address some of the alternatives that have been discussed in politics. These alternatives simply don't add up. Take earned income tax credit, for example, a program touted by the likes of current American President Donald Trump. In this program, this $65 billion annual program, every household earning below $51,492 American dollars is eligible for tax credits, which basically remove the tax income that they have to pay. Now, while touted as a more work-oriented solution to poverty, ultimately this program has been fraught with high administrative costs, with huge amounts of its money being paid in error, and an even greater, or rather unknown amount being paid to outright fraudulent sources. Now, and as I've said before, the reformed welfare programs, like TANF, for example, have largely failed due to stricter eligibility requirements and time frames. This really only leaves one other viable alternative to universal basic income, that is negative income tax. And while possibly the strongest contender against universal basic income, ultimately the program itself would require significantly higher administrative costs than the much, much easier to administrate universal basic income. Now, I have not come here to advocate a global adoption of UBI right at this moment. That would be a mistake. But what I do stand for is I stand for further experimentation on this. I stand for experiments like that of Stockton, like that of Ontario, like that of Kenya, like that of Cambodia, being replicated and spread around the world so we can know how to best apply and best refine this policy so that one day it can ultimately allow for a general reduction of poverty. What I stand for are solutions that reach across the political aisle and reach out a hand towards the working class to help them bring themselves up in society. And now that we know what we all stand for, why don't we all take a stand and take a leap of faith towards a fairer, simpler, and better world. Thank you.